So welcome to the U2B podcast. Today's podcast is on how a business copes with an illness or a death of a business partner or owner. In the room this morning we have...
I'm Rhian Simpson. I'm an independent financial advisor at HRS Asset Management Limited.
I'm Andrew Wheeler. I'm also an independent financial advisor at East Mills Limited in Kidderminster.
I'm Pete Savage. I'm a will writer and estate planner for Deed Safe Wills and Legal Services.
And I'm Shaun Philpott from Copia Wealth and Tax, a firm of accountants just outside Wolverhampton.
And I'm Ben Coates, facilitating today. So, Pete, there's nothing more serious than a serious illness or unfortunate death of a business partner or owner. Tell us about your will services and how they provide protection for those kind of situations.
First of all, it depends upon the circumstances. Is it an illness or a death? Illness, loss of capacity, you're talking about a lasting power of attorney there, which you can have a specific one for dealings just for the business and a separate one for your personal affairs. For a death, the will or other agreements come into play then. Mainly the will would be for sole traders. For a sole trader, the business is within your estate, so that's covered by the will. What you can do there is you can appoint a specific executor to deal solely with your business affairs, and again a separate one for your personal affairs. It can be for what would happen to the business on your death. First of all, is there a business there? With some sole traders, the business dies with the person, there's nothing there. Others, there could be a business to sell on. The business executor could hire somebody to run the business and sell it as a going concern, which then would raise more funds for the beneficiaries.
And that would of course then bring in succession planning, wouldn't it? Which brings you into it, Shaun, doesn't it? Succession planning with your companies that you do the accounts for.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. I mean, we've got a lot of family business clients. Some of them are multi-generational. They've been around for a long time. They sort of pass down the generations. Others, not so. But what we do find is that we're always talking to our clients about thinking about the future and what's going to happen. Now, obviously, you'd hope that would be the existing business owner, who person running the business reaches retirement age and has decided to exit the business. Are they passing that business down or disposing of it or bringing someone in to run it for them? So that's the one side of it, but obviously sometimes you don't get to that point. You know, there can be a sudden death or a sudden incapacity for somebody, and then what happens in that situation? What are your plans to make sure that there is someone around to run that business? So yeah, the power of attorney is quite important. Who are you going to give that power of attorney to? Is there somebody else within the business that can come in and run it if you're incapacitated or in the short term after your death until the affairs can be sorted out? And a lot of people don't really think about that, and I have to nag a lot of clients about it because it's sort of it might happen, but it's very unlikely. Well, we all know it's unlikely, but at the end of the day, these things happen every day. So it is an important thing to think about with your business.
Andrew, this is where you come in because you have something called key man insurance.
Yes, that's correct, Ben. So what you can effectively do is put a protection policy in place that can actually be offset as a business expense. Because as Shaun and Pete were saying, if you've got people who are key people within the business or directors of the business, if one of them goes, let's say it's especially down to a partner who brings in a lot of business, how is those relationships then going to be managed? And when I say if one of them goes, that could be through an untimely death, or it could be through a serious illness. Now, there's a very important difference between the two of those, because I mentioned earlier that you can offset it as a business expense potentially on key man insurance. However, that really relates to if somebody was to pass away. There is a bit of a grey area around critical illness. So if somebody were to suffer a critical illness, they could return to work at a later date. So it all depends on the planning aspects they really require.
And of course, that's where the power of attorney comes in, isn't it? Because sometimes the power of attorney is needed before the death, isn't it, Pete?
Yes, the power of attorney will come into play mainly on mental incapacity. The person involved cannot perform their task in the business anymore. So the power of attorney will appoint somebody else to fill that role. But obviously it needs to be somebody with the necessary skills and knowledge to do that.
And it can be quite important with things like the banks, for instance. So if you do suddenly become incapacitated and you're the sole signatory on your company bank account, it can cause a major problem if you haven't got a power of attorney in place, because the bank will not deal with anybody else. So effectively, your bank account can almost be frozen.
And it's vital that you're involved in that conversation as an accountant, Shaun, because I would imagine that you need to know where that business is going and how you can guide that business, because if you can keep that business going for the person that you've dealt with for perhaps years, that must mean a lot then. So so you must be involved with people like Pete quite a bit, really, in that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, it tends to be a regular topic when I'm talking to clients, just to make sure they have thought about these things and made some plans. It's not always easy to get them to do it, I have to say, but you just have to keep being a bit of a nag sometimes, really, keep going at people. And one of the other things you need to think about as well is also, if you've got a business which is owned by several people and one of them suddenly dies, what happens to their shareholding, for instance? Could pass on to their other half knows nothing about the business. The people who currently now are also shareholders in the business are suddenly thinking, we've now got a shareholder we don't really know, who doesn't understand the business, who's potentially got some power to make decisions on the business. So the other thing that you really need to think about having is a shareholders agreement, so that it deals with situations like that, where it might say if one of the shareholders dies, the other shareholders have the right to buy the shares off them before they pass to a third party that they don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, Rhian.
I was going to say that was something I was going to mention, Shaun, because that's another area we can look at is shareholder protection. And like Shaun just rightly said, if shares pass, say, to a spouse, effectively that person could come in, take up a pew in the business and start, making decisions. So that aspect, again, it's something that people don't think will happen to them. As advisors, we can also look at shareholder protection and key man as well.
Pete, from the rights point of view, all this has to be incorporated, and you're in an unregulated industry, aren't you, Pete? So it's very, very vital that people that are taking out wills do a bit of research and who they're dealing with, because all this needs to be taken care of, and you've had many years' experience of that, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. And the other important thing, shareholders agreements, there's also partnership agreements, obviously for a partnership, perform a very similar task, just giving the surviving partner the rights to buy the share of the business from the deceased partner. The other important thing, which is sometimes forgotten, is somebody will start a business and put that business in their will. Then the business grows and they take on a partner, or it goes limited and there's other directors, so they'll put a partnership or directors agreement in place, but they forget that their original will is leaving the business to their spouse. So the will and these agreements are clashing. So it's important to revisit the will and make sure all the agreements in the will do say the same thing. They're not contrasting each other, which again can cause major problems.
And who would hold all these documents? Because there needs to be a sticking point, isn't it, at the top? Would it be the accountant, or would it be the will writer? Or is there a body that you need to register it with?
I would say store them somewhere safe and make sure all the interested parties know where it's stored. Another classic mistake is that some people will store their will and the other agreements in a safety deposit box in the bank. The problem is, to get in that safety deposit box you need a grant of probate, but you can't get a grant of probate without the will. It's to be stored safe, and just make sure your executors knows where it's stored. That is the massive, very common mistake, is the will's there but nobody knows where it is.
And executors as IFAs, I imagine that you have to know who the executors are, don't you? Because of all the investments that they make and the policies they make to carry them out. Because there's no point taking out insurances if nobody knows where that insurance is.
We work quite closely with solicitors and other professionals, so hopefully at that point we can kind of liaise with the relevant professionals and get the things sorted out. Yeah, that's a really good point. People hiding away documents and thinking they're in a safe place and just not telling people about it. And I think this is the big thing, is that people don't want to talk about things like that sometimes. You really need to have these discussions and get plans in place.
If I just use a professional and make certain you know where all your documents are and discuss them with the appropriate people, or make certain you've told your professional.
So any final points before we wrap up this next podcast?
No, I think it all comes down to just it's like everything else. It's looking at it's sort of planning for events that you don't want to think about. But the point is, they do happen every day, even though it's not, obviously the chances of it happening to you is pretty low, but it does happen. And if you haven't planned for it, it can cause major problems. And a business that you built up over a number of years can suddenly just fall apart purely because you haven't planned. And at the end of the day, it takes a little bit of time, costs you a little bit of money, but it's well worth spending that time and money, I think.
Pete, you're the will writer, so do you want to wrap up the section of it?
The other good thing you can do is keep an up-to-date list of your assets, your shares, your bank accounts. Just makes things a whole lot easier for your executors and the people who are left behind to pick up the pieces. So a list of all your assets, where they are, your bank accounts, and as I said before, where your wills and your important documents are. They need to know that.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.